Knowing that I was doing this podcast in an unscripted way, I believed would help me become better as a coach, because as a coach, I am constantly having conversations with my intention of it being a certain topic, and never knowing where it was going to lead based on what the client shares.
Every marketer you see, every business, they are pushing the idea of branding. It's like, if you really want to build out your business, even for those who don't have a business, that was an odd thing I heard. People who want to build their career up as a professional, you need to have a personal brand.
If you're going to do a podcast, my perspective is be intentional about how it fits into the bigger picture. What's up, Coaches Nation? It's another episode of the Coach's Journey podcast. I am Dr. Sherry Fluellen, one of the co-hosts with Faisal and San, we are here to bring you value today. And we are so excited about today because we are going to give you a behind the look scenes of a podcast. Like, that's what this podcast is about. We just wanted to share with you the journey of doing a podcast, some of the reasons why we started, how things have shifted and changed as we've been doing it, and even what are we planning on doing in the future? What is our vision for this podcast that hasn't materialized yet, but that we're working towards? So we're going to unpack all that stuff, because I know that a lot of coaches and just a lot of people in business who want to have impact think about starting a podcast. But it's not as easy. It is as easy as it sounds, but it's also not as easy as it sounds at the same time. So this is just going to be a real and raw conversation, quite frankly, like all of our podcasts, but about this podcast itself. So it's kind of meta, right? A little bit talking about the talking.
We're talking about the talking, and there might be talking about that talking.
So Faisal, how we started this podcast, and I probably should have actually gotten the exact date. I want to say, so we've been doing it over 2 years, and it was November, if I remember right. So that would be November of 21.
Possibly. Time goes by very fast in my I usually think so. I thought a few months ago that we've only been doing this for 1 year. Sherry's like, no, we've been doing this for 2 years. Like, we have?
Yeah. Time goes fast. So over 2 years ago, the Coaching Mastery community is where this podcast was born out of. The Coaching Mastery community is a community for coaches, by coaches, to the coaches. What are any of those other things? I feel like I'm doing a speech. And so it's a community that serves coaches to help them level up in their coaching business. It's very collaborative, very focused on implementation. It's not just giving information and knowledge with a guru. That's not the way that we function. It's all very collaborative, mastermind, and we focus on doing the work instead of just giving the information and hoping people do something with it. Because I've been in communities where that is the model, and that doesn't work real well. And so we had thought, hey, if we add kind of a level of conversation, a level of information, a level of entertainment to this through podcasting, that might be able to reach an even greater audience. So from my memory, that was kind of one of the reasons we started, because it was really in support of the mission, and we looked at it as an opportunity to increase our reach. What are your thoughts and memories about kind of how we started or why we started?
So I have some good thoughts on that. So I just pulled out the exact date we posted our first episode. I don't think we went live on YouTube, but we went live on Facebook. But it was on October 8, 2021, where we posted our first, and that was after it got edited. So it might have been the first week of October that we actually launched it. So October 2020.
You said. I shortchanged us by a month. Geez.
Yeah, so you're pretty accurate. Very, very close. You guessed it much closer than I would. So do you remember how the whole idea for podcast got started?
I have this feeling that you had this like desire to do a podcast, and you kept on dropping these hints, but kept on getting turned down by some of our other partners who thought it was like petty. And petty, by petty, I mean like it didn't matter. It wouldn't have an impact. It was kind of a distraction, a side thing that we could do way down the road. And I think you kept on like dropping these little hints, these like, hey, we could, and you just were super persistent in it. What is your memory of that?
So in the beginning it was hints, but then at some point I was like, I want to start a podcast. So it's either for myself or I can do this for Coaching Master Community. And here's the cool part. So I don't know if you remember this part. So you were on vacation and you were lying down somewhere on a beach and you messaged, it's like, I think there's something to the podcast idea. After that, it actually picked up because, well, you were the biggest supporter there, clearly. You stuck to it.
I
And
was
then
the only supporter.
you were the only supporter at that point. So when we had our other meetings, so you kind of backed up the idea too, and then we had a conversation, and we thought of it in different way. We thought that, okay, because it wasn't actually supported within Coaching Master Community in the beginning, because it was, even after we proposed the idea, was looked at as a distraction.
Yeah.
So we thought of it two ways. Either we connected with Coaching Master Community or we independently moved this forward as a separate brand. And this is why we picked a different name than Coaching Master Community as well.
That's right.
You
Oh, the
remember that conversation?
controversy. I do. I do. It almost, God, yeah, I totally remember now. My memories are coming up, and the feelings I had around starting this, because it was not supported. I think we had five kind of owners, coaches that were owning and leaders of the community at the time, and the other three did not think this was worth the energy. And when you're building a business, it is always wise to count the cost of everything that you do. You can't do everything at once. You really do need to be selective. And you and I were the only ones that had the perspective that this was worth the time. But I totally forgot that we started the podcast as kind of like the Faisal and Sherry show, independent, just to kind of see how we wanted to do it. Excuse me. And I remember thinking or feeling kind of like, to use an analogy, kind of like a teenager that's doing something that they kind of feel like they shouldn't. They don't really want to let their parents know. So they're kind of like sneaking
Ooh,
off
we
to
were
do
rebels.
right? Because it was outside of the scope of our focus and our conversations in Coaching Mastery Community. So it was kind of this side thing that was like, hush, hush. At least that's the way it felt. Not that there was anything wrong with it. I mean, because if a teenager is doing something, trying to keep the parents out of it, that should be a clue that probably shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, that's super fascinating.
It is. So also, and there was another step. So we just started doing it without like getting a full approval, or at the time we didn't even, I don't even think we got approved because we didn't want to do any of the editing or anything ourselves. We wanted to hand it over to a VA, and at the time we had hired a VA, or we wanted to hire. I don't remember this clear. I think we wanted to hire a VA, and then we did. And what we pitched was that part of what the VA would do was the podcast. And at least the initial idea was that we had been at this in Coaching Master Community for a good 3.5 years at that time. And we wanted to, most of the clients that we had gone was through referrals. It was a closed net community. And we wanted to reach out to more coaches. And at the time, nobody knew what the hell Coaching Master Community was or what we were doing. So how are we promoting this? Nobody knows about it. And that was a big question in my mind. So if we're going to do this long term, if we're serious about doing this, how are people going to find out? And part of our vision was to kind of start collaborating with bigger influencers in the coaching world and in the bigger marketing world too. So when we do start building a relationship with them, what are we telling them? We've been a world's best kept secret in the corner nobody knows about, which a lot of coaches are, by the way. So that's what pushed us. And the next level of credibility that we got was actually the marketing coach that we hired. I don't know if you remember that drawing that Ant, who was our original marketing coach that drew a couple of years ago, where he put like, how are you going to promote the community? And one of the first things I remember him drawing was podcasts. And I didn't say anything, but I was yes. That's when the team started being like, okay, maybe there is something to it. And the idea of, and this is to frame the idea of the podcast for us, the idea of the podcast was not to get clients right now. The idea of the podcast was a long-term branding effort.
Yeah.
One, this is consistent content that tells people that this is what we're doing. This and even at that time, branding was not, at least when I was listening to marketers, business owners, it wasn't as big. But now, 2 years later, every marketer you see, every business, they are pushing the idea of branding. It's like, if you really want to build out your business, even for those who don't have a business, there, that was an odd thing I heard. People who want to build their career up as a professional, you need to have a personal brand. So, and that's mainly because of the way social media has shifted in the world, with the AI coming into the picture, and a lot of people are looking at your personal brand as your resume. So what are you doing out the world? So this was more of a long-term play. And now we're starting to realize, okay, this is going to play a crucial role in us getting clients as we move forward.
There's always tension in business, and this has been my experience, in how much time and energy and resources do we put in the long-term play versus the immediate play? Because there is a reality to, if we don't focus on sustaining our business now, this month, this year, we may not be in business to care about the long-term play.
Yeah.
And if we don't focus on the long-term play, then we're always just, barely a step ahead of ourselves. And we're losing an opportunity for really the flywheel effect of things getting moving and going faster, or the hockey stick, improvement, lots of different terms for it or analogies. And that was the tension we had, was that we legitimately were still trying to figure out how would we sustain ourselves month to month. And that was most of the conversations for the coaching mastery community. And then with this idea of like, and what if we focus on a long-term play as well? And so that tension was real. And I think it's real in every business. And it's interesting. I heard a statistic the other day. I did not research this. This actually came from Alex Hermosi, but he was talking about podcasts, and he said something to the effect of there's only 1% of podcasts that ever publish more than, I think it was like 10 or 15 episodes. And so already the fact that we're over 100, I think, since we've done it consistently for 2.5 years, we've not missed a week of putting something out. So we would
Wait,
actually
I
be,
think we missed 1 week as far
what?
as we did, but well, one was intentional. I think it was around Christmas time, and we might have missed 1 week. So 2 out of 2, maybe 1 or 2 weeks out of 2 years that we did.
All right. Because I thought we batched episodes like so that we always had a little bit of a backlog.
Oh, no,
So
no, we had that. Yes, I'm talking about the live. I'm talking about the
oh,
just.
okay. Okay. So if you listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple, or whatever, there should be one every week, right?
Yeah,
But
that
if
part.
you're watching, okay, if you're watching us live, then maybe we would have missed like 2 of them. So yeah,
So
totally.
we have been like 5 or 6 episodes ahead since, for the past at least year and a half or something like that.
Yeah. And so it's just interesting. So I'm like super proud of the fact that even with having these periods of kind of scarcity mentality of like, how do we get this? How do we sustain this right now? That we have still chosen to have some concerted effort and energy and financial resources invested into this podcast, which still is a long-term play.
Yes, and I want to kind of talk a little bit to how this might be useful for coaches for their own business, because this podcast is for coaches, and I have my own podcast. I'm actually much more intentional in this podcast than I am with my own podcast. My podcast is pretty much the trainings that I do that my social media manager takes and turns it into a podcast. But we're actually doing it as a podcast.
Yeah.
So the play in there is, and this is how we're teaching this in coaching master community, is that if you need clients right now in the next 3 to 6 months, podcast might not be the thing that you want to do. Because like Sherry said, you need to sustain your business. You need to get clients for you to even do that. So for you to get clients, podcast building groups or newsletter or any of that stuff, all that stuff is really good, but they all might be long-term play. how are you getting clients right now versus how you're getting clients long term? And I know a couple of coaches who have really successful podcasts, and they're actually getting clients because of the podcast. In fact, they've built their communities because of the podcast. And how they did, but they've been doing it for a while, 4+ years, 3+ years, and that's the average that a lot of people who've done really good, built really good podcasts that give it at least 4 years before you even do anything. And I've heard this from one Alex Hermosi. He has the perspective too. Gary Vee has the same. And I was listening to Gary Vee on, he's like, this is how podcasts work. And he was comparing two people who started with the lens that, you know what, this is going to help me get clients. One person starts with the lens that's going to help me get clients. The other person starts with the lens that, you know what, I'm just going to do this because I enjoy this. I have fun. I just like talking, like me. So I'll just talk. And I'll just enjoy the process as I'm doing this. And he's like, the person who started it with the lens of I'm just going to get clients in the next 3 months because of this podcast, they'll probably end up giving up after 3 to 6 months, hence the 10 to 15 episodes. And the person who did it just because they wanted to do it, the message was important to them, they enjoyed the process, they like talking about the subject matter, they're going to go on for a while, and then one day or one time period in there, something will pick up.
Yeah.
It has hit a momentum where a lot of people are focused on it. Of course, you need to do a lot of the work. There is still work involved for you to promote the podcast and do other things. And we'll talk about that too a little bit as to what that has looked like. And to be honest, we're still in the initial stages of promoting the podcast. Our focus has been to refine the quality, how we do and how we're going to move the conversations forward. What we want to communicate, how do we work with guests, not with guests, and that has shifted a lot. So we've had to experiment so many things where we've come to a point where we feel confident that this is how we want to run our podcast. And just a couple, and this is also value add for our school members. So right now we have, if you haven't joined our school community, you should find the link below. And like we said, we've been ahead 5 or 6 episodes, and maybe we'll be ahead more. So the live episodes only go to our school group, and whatever we do. So the ones that get posted later on, that's like 6 to 8 weeks later, it goes on Spotify, YouTube, and other places. And so this is also value add for our community, that we actually, these are raw conversations. We don't, like, we do prepare a little bit, very, very minimum, but even if we invite guests, this is a raw conversation. There's been some tension sometimes with guests because of that, which we like. So this is also value add for our community members. So you can also think of it that way, that, hey, if you have a live podcast, that's also an extra value for a community you built, whether you're doing group coaching or you're building community for your clients, something like that.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the shifts that we made in how we do our podcast over time, because there's been a couple significant shifts. One of the challenges that I see and have experienced for myself when starting anything is feeling like I need to have the whole thing planned out. I need to have the perfect plan from the get-go, because if I shift or do something different, then I feel like, or I might feel kind of like I didn't know what I was doing, or, it's this fear of like exposing our inadequacies to the world. So when we started, we didn't really know exactly how we wanted to do it, but pretty quickly we landed on this idea of that I hear a lot of other podcasters talk about, like, hey, if you don't know what to say on a podcast, bring other people in who will do the speaking for you. And not that we don't have our own ideas and thoughts, but we thought, hey, if we have a lot of other coaches on our podcast who can share their journey, hence Coach's Journey podcast, that would, bring people in. They would hear stories. I mean, who doesn't love stories? We know that stories are powerful in marketing and learning. And so we really worked. We had this whole calendaring system set up, which we still have, to be able to schedule people in our sphere who were coaches or had an impact in coaching, to have them come on our podcast. And so that is primarily, from my memory, how we did so many of our beginning podcasts, is we tried to get as many people scheduled as possible. And well, let me pause, because there were some really great things about it and then some challenges that we had. So maybe we'll jump into those in a minute. Did you want to kind of add anything to that, Faisal?
Yeah, I mean, just I was surprised. It's actually a lot of work to find guests to begin with, and we didn't want to do extra work. And also, every guest is so different, and guests go on podcasts with different intentions, and we wanted to bring guests who would deliver a lot of value. And at least with all the things that were happening in our business, I didn't feel like we were getting some of the guests were really good. They did deliver value, but many of the guests that we were getting, they were not. We thought that we would deliver better value, for lack of yes, we think we're better than our guests. No, that wasn't the point, but we didn't feel like it was delivering the value that we were hoping for for our listenings that were listening to this, for our listeners that were listening to the podcast. So we actually have a guest coming up next week. So intermittently, so what we shifted, and that was also a recommendation by our marketing coach too, is that if you guys want to build your credibility and your expertise in the industry, then and if you can talk about the subject matter, then share your own thoughts. You don't have to have guests. And that was a big change for us. Like, I never thought of it that way until I heard it. And I think Sherry and I both agreed on that would go better. So for the most part, a lot of the podcasts shifted towards us doing the podcast. And once in a while, we would have guests when we find the right guest, instead of kind of being in a hurry to find any guest that would jump on the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. And so another aspect of this podcast that we've been very intentional about, even when we had guests or when we don't have guests, is we don't want to be scripted. So there's certain podcasts that I'm sure everybody, as you're listening to this, there's certain podcasts that you listen to that like you have no idea what to expect. It is just a complete randomness that comes out based on the conversation. And then there's ones that are very scripted. And maybe some of those are even like Faisal described his personal podcast, where it's maybe something a workshop or some presentation or something that was delivered that then is put on that podcast. Well, we were both in alignment that we wanted this podcast to be real, raw, unscripted. And part of what then became a challenge is so many of our guests this is my interpretation, they would get super anxious about being on a podcast and they wanted structure, right? Because when we're anxious, when we're nervous, like we want the comfort of knowing something. But because we had made that intentional decision to not be scripted, we didn't have like this list of, and I've been a lot of podcasts, I know you have too, Faisal. And a lot of times when I am a guest, I'll get a list of like, these are the 7 questions they're going to ask you. And is there any specific question you want them to ask you? Which is okay. But honestly, I love just going on and like not really knowing what's going to happen. That's fun for me, and fun because it stretches and grows me. And for me anyway, knowing that I was doing this podcast in an unscripted way, I believed would help me become better as a coach, because as a coach, I am constantly having conversations with my intention of it being a certain topic, and never knowing where it was going to lead based on what the client shares. So I had the belief, and I still believe, I think my belief was strengthened through this process, that if I can hang for an hour every week on a podcast, just, shooting the breeze about whatever coaching topic we decided on and that sort of thing, that I would become a better coach in being able to spontaneously ask better questions and be more thoughtful in the moment. But that is not set well with a lot of our guests. That is the single biggest feedback we would get, because we would ask our guests, hey, how was the experience? Is there anything we can do better? That is the only consistent feedback that we would get is, hey, I would love to have had more of a insight into what to expect. So we did try to improve on that. We recorded a video that we would send to our guests in advance that literally said, there is no expectations, basically. So we were educating them to not have that. This is not going to be scripted. And so that was our best attempt at trying to mitigate that, so that people didn't kind of feel like they were left floundering. So that's been an interesting thing. Do you have, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And I don't know if you go on a podcast and they have, and I've had like I just filled out a form for a podcast that is a real estate podcast, and they have really good followers too. And first they asked me about the topic. Then they're like, "What questions would you like me to ask you?" That I'm having to write the questions. So I chat GPT the whole thing. I'm like, I don't have time for this. I have to come up with the questions for. But then if you're gonna ask me specific questions that I know ahead of time, then that's not a conversation. I can just record it and send it to you. That's at least to me, that doesn't sound very interesting, because a lot of times when we have these conversations, we actually end up learning something that we didn't think of ahead of time. And even when we're speaking about it, we're learning about it and we're hearing the other side. And sometimes there has been tension even between Sherry and I. Is like, oh no, I don't think I agree with that, and I don't, and we don't know. And this is a live podcast. We're not gonna, and even the editing that we do, we're actually not explicitly telling our editor to remove these pieces out. We actually haven't. We've had a couple of moments of tension with, for example, one of the guests that came on the podcast. She was fairly successful as a coach, but I just didn't like that she was focusing so much on the success, but not sharing the the path towards it. So I was kind of digging in a little bit and challenging her a little bit, and then all three of us could feel the tension. I remember I asked Sherry, like, how did you, she was like, yeah, there was tension. And I actually asked the guest as well. She did appreciate that I approached it in a way where I wasn't putting her down, but I was challenging her. It was like, okay, did you really make $47 in 1 month? Or what led up to that? Because and
$47 or 47,000?
$47,000
There
in
we
one
go.
month. 47, sorry, $47,000 in 1 month of coaching offers. And really, and part of what we're trying to do is actually bring what is how are coaches really building their businesses? How are they building their craft? And when people are communicating, they either omit the challenges or they omit the journey. And they talk about the successes more and what they have more. But what we wanted to talk more about is what are the struggles? What is the learning curve you had to go through? And most of the time, the way coaches have heard all this from marketers, from other people who have done this, oh, it's very easy. Like, you just have to jump in and you're gonna have a six-figure business in 1 year. That is not quite what happens when you jump into as much as there's demand in there. And then they hear other weird things. The coaching world is so overly saturated that you'll never make it in business. No, that's not true either. So we wanted to kind of dispel, like, get rid of all those myths. Is like, what does it take to build this path? And this is a career path. This is a path and one of those paths where you have unlimited potential, whatever you want to do, whatever kind of life you want to build, but it takes work. It takes a lot of dedication. It takes a lot of getting out of your comfort zone. And this is why we wanted to share our journey and get other people to share their journey. And then as we progress, and this is a part that's really unique for us, and maybe this is something you can think about for yourself. What makes our community unique and the podcast unique is that neither of us are saying I'm the expert to teach you this thing, but we're actually bringing together the knowledge base from multiple coaches who are actually putting themselves out there, because we have these conversations. We've had these conversations consistently with coaches who are trying to put themselves out there as coaches, building their businesses for the past 5 or 6 years. So our knowledge is essentially an accumulation of our own experience and what we're hearing from other coaches that are actually trying to make their business work, or that have made their business work, not based on some idea that some marketer figured out 20 years ago, and they keep preaching that in the world of AI, that world did not exist. And at the time, video was new. And if you just put out one video, you got like 10,000 followers and people started. That world doesn't exist. And a lot of the times you see marketers kind of still promoting that thing. For many coaches, it's a struggle sometimes to find clients. And even if they're going live, even if they're visible, they have a hard time getting clients consistently.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so just to highlight a couple of things that you said, Faisal, one is that part of our mission in our podcast and in the community and as a whole is to peel back the curtain, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, peel back the curtain so that you can see what is really behind the success. It's inspiring. I think it's inspiring to hear people's journey of success and to hear about all the struggles and the challenges along the way. Otherwise, when I hit those challenges and when I hit those struggles, I think I'm unique. It's just me. I'm a failure and all of the stuff that goes with it. So we really want there to be an openness around the challenges that it really takes to build a functioning, profitable coaching business. So I love that you talk about that. What are some of the changes that we've made recently? Because we talked about kind of our shift with being heavy in guests and now not doing as many guests. What are some of the other shifts that you kind of can remember that we've made, Faisal?
So a few shifts, so some subtle shifts. So a lot of times when we jump, and this requires some preparation, we used to just pick the topic and just go with it because it was spontaneous. So we do a little bit more prep now. So we have the topics selected for a few weeks out, even though we go live, and more often than not, we spend at least 5 or 10 minutes, have some questions, some key points that we're going to cover. I think that helped the flow a little bit, even though we could go in a different direction. At least we have something. A lot like coaching sessions that coaches do, where you have your questions. Doesn't mean you will go exactly that way, but at least
Yeah.
you were prepared to some degree. That's been a good shift. I think Sherry presented that from her frustration of listening to me go on for a while.
Well, and that's exactly it. Like Faisal and I have a different personality, obviously, and a different kind of communication, the way that we communicate and things like that. And so, and Faisal has so much experience that when he gets on, there's a topic that he's like passionate about because he's got a whole bunch of recent experiences that highlight that, he can go on for 25 minutes and I could just, be sitting here smiling and just kind of letting him go. And sometimes that's valuable, but for me, there's this tension of, how long do we go on a specific topic, and how do we make sure that we're giving valuable nuggets and takeaways and all of these things. And so then without that preparation, what I felt was that having a kind of a progressive flow to like an end wrap up was a little bit harder. So having this agreed format of, so for example, here's my notes for today on the back of my bank, a third of a bank statement. And I have questions. Here are my questions. Why did we start? What was the hardest parts of the first few months? What was our original purpose? What was our format? What changes have we made along the way? How is our podcast different now? And what vision do we have for the future of podcasting? Like these are the notes for today. And literally Faisal didn't even know this. Like these were my notes. And so because we have worked with each other now for a couple of years, we really have this way of being able to kind of give and take back and forth, kind of know how long to talk before we take a breath and let the other person interject or these sorts of things. So it's really a dance that we have gotten a little bit more intentional about, but are still leaving it kind of a free form intentionally.
And I didn't realize how in tune we were until, which is the another change we made was Daniel Fernandez, one of our partners, joined. Until I started doing podcasts with him, and I realized how out of sync we are. And Daniel is a process person, so he needs to know ahead of time what's happening. We kind of riff and kind of go along. And he's adapting too. So to his credit, he's trying to adapt to different ways of doing things. So I'll give him that credit. So when I'm before we're preparing for the podcast, so one of the things that maybe you'll notice that in some of the podcasts is like, if you're going on for a while, I'll just do this. I remember a couple of the podcasts he did that. He's going on.
He's scratching his ear for 10 minutes because you won't shut up.
No, that was hilarious. I'm not even noticing it, to be honest.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's
And
amazing.
if Daniel's listening to this, yeah, it didn't work. So he has to interrupt me, and he tends to. I mean, he interrupts a lot. So it like I'm still trying to figure out how that. I think we're getting better, but that I actually realized how in sync we are because of that experience. So that's the other major change. So Daniel is gonna be one of the ones who will be hosting the podcast now. He's trying to understand, and that's very recent. How long has it been? 3 months? 2 months?
Maybe two.
Yeah, so as of the recording of this podcast, which is April 17th, it's been a couple of months since Daniel has gotten involved in the podcast. So he's doing more of the podcasts with Sherry. I don't know how your experience of Daniel has been, but we're slowly adapting, we're learning. And of
Absolutely.
course, it takes a little bit of time to figure it out. But here's the cool thing about Sherry. I say this to Sherry, partly because we've been in meetings together, like in our company meetings, but in the podcast as well. I feel like I've gotten used to Sherry's very subtle expressions. All I have to do is look at her face, and I know I'm talking too much.
Apparently, I have like an eye twitch or something that's a tell for Faisal that he needs to wrap it up so we can, it's funny because I literally don't know what it is that he's seeing.
I
So
don't know either, but I know very clearly that I need to shut the hell up, and this does not work, Daniel.
So part of me is sad because I can never be a poker player if this is what's going on. And the other part of me is like proud because I don't want to live a life where my emotions are kept under a rock. So I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it.
No, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a great thing. So I'm curious on your side, what's been your experience with this shift? Sometimes we're on a podcast, all three of us, sometimes the two of us, and now we recently made a decision that just the two of us we will alternate, as we will see two of us most of the time.
Yeah, I think it is just how do you gel with somebody else's communication style. And we know Daniel very well because he's been part of our leadership in our organization that we're a part of for as long as, well, actually longer than me, I think, and as long as Faisal. So it's not that it's not that I don't know him as well in some respects, but podcasting and having these riff conversations just is a different style. And it's been fun and it's been a bit of a challenge. And I would say probably the biggest growth opportunity for me as a podcaster has been how do I get out of my head and more in the moment, which, as I mentioned earlier, like these are skill sets that I need as a coach. And I've gotten a lot better at it. There's probably some podcasts, if I go back like a year or a year and a half or even 2 years, that I'm imagining my facial expression is probably blank as you're talking, Faisal, because I'm processing like, okay, Faisal's sharing the story. I know it's valuable. Is it as valuable as if we shifted the conversation to this next topic? Like, this is what's going on in my brain. I'm like trying to process, should I be moving things along? Should I let him do his thing? Like, at what point do I interrupt? And so I'm not fully present. And fortunately, over time, I've been able to, just through the sheer doing it, I think I've gotten better at that. And again, this is making me a better coach and a better group coach and individual coach as well.
Yeah, and also a better communicator. So for me, it was also an internal growth thing, is because people will be listening to this podcast and we're going to be getting feedback. Can we communicate concepts, ideas in a way that will be useful, valuable for others? So it makes us better conversationalists, just in general, better communicators, better in sales, because we're also selling ideas here too. If you're triggered by the word sales, then you have work to do. Join our community. Overall, I think if you have a desire to improve as a leader, as a communicator, as a coach, I think it helps a lot. I was gonna say something related to, yeah. So by the way, one thing you've improved on in the beginning, I used to talk a lot, but I think there was a shift happened maybe a year ago or something like that, where you basically, not through your facial, you just told me to shut up. I was actually glad because I think I got tired of listening to my own voice partly, but partly because you had really great ideas, and actually that's what I wanted. I think it needed to be more of a conversation. I think we've come to a point where we're a little bit balanced in our own ways, but I think that comes with experience. And so if you're a coach thinking about starting a podcast, you might not start it with somebody, or you might consider collaborating with another coach if you don't want to feel like, and you don't have to do it live. You could do like a 10-minute podcast, or you could do it the way I actually don't even do my podcast. My podcast is Insan Group. No, Insan Group is my company. The Insan Experience. Don't sue me. You find out. than Son experience. But I don't actually talk like my social media manager. She's put like an intro in the beginning, and she got tired of me not sending her that short clip, so she recorded it herself. She ended up recording it herself, but basically she takes my trainings that I do in my community. I also broadcast those live, and then I give her the recording, and she just puts that on the podcast and some other trainings that I do. So pretty much every week I send her a training, and a lot of things you can use for podcasts. It's just a matter of what are you trying to gain out of it. I'm much more intentional on this because we're actually building up a brand for CM Coaching Mastery Community, the Coach's Journey podcast, to help us connect with coaches more, with other influencers more, with other coaches who are in the industry. Because really, our bigger mission is to move this industry forward. Yes, we're helping coaches. Yes, we're selling a program, but I think we're all in we want this industry to grow, because as the industry grows, we grow with it. And I don't just mean from us being business coaches point of view, but just us being as coaches, the quality of the coaching gets better. We get better coaches, and better coaches get better clients, and they start to tell other people, and this normalizes the process. And it's actually happened. Like this is actually this past 2-3 years, I'm hearing more and more that people know coaches. Like they know that they might not understand what coaching is specifically, but they know people who have coaches.
Yeah.
And in fact, I had a sales call recently. The guy's like, every successful person I listen to, they've had a life or performance coach. Even Alex Hormozi said that actually in a couple of he's like, oh, I work with this high performance coach at some point who actually got him to really rethink his approach. But really, it normalizes the process. We get better clients. It means that we have built a better reputation for what the coaching is, and I think this is going to become a field where it will be in competition, maybe even with therapy and other kind of, or maybe it will be a collaborative thing, because a lot of the models for coaching, at least I feel like they're working better than therapies a lot of times, or it's at least supplementing what people are getting in that end.
Awesome. And one thing I don't want our listeners to miss kind of with what you said is the takeaway that if you're going to do a podcast, my perspective is be intentional about how it fits into the bigger picture. Because if
Yeah.
you do a podcast that you don't really know how it ties into your coaching, or you don't really understand the relationship, you don't know where you're going to get the content or what you're going to talk about, or who the listener is going to be, who are you speaking to? Like there's so many, like a podcast in and of itself really is a business. But then it's a business embedded in your coaching business. And
Yeah.
how is it going to fit in? Where is it going to be a lead gen opportunity? In which case, then there's some things that you might want to say in your podcast to let people know what programs you have. So all of that to say, really, if you want to do a podcast, or if you are doing a podcast, get as clear as you can on how it fits into the bigger picture, because that will increase the likelihood for longevity. And we've had some of these types of conversations in the Coaching Mastery community. And our pro members have opportunities to have one-on-ones with us to talk about their business stuff. So we'd be happy, Faisal or I could be happy to really dig into helping you kind of map it out and figure it out for you, or with you, not for you, but with you. All right. So one question that I would love for us to end with, Faisal, did you guys see how I did that? Faisal was ready to talk, and I'm thinking, oh, we probably should wrap this up. So I just jump in with like a closing question. See?
He knows.
Yeah, yeah. What is our vision for this podcast as we continue?
When I look at it long term, I think we've talked about this briefly. I actually want to do the podcast in person as much as we can. Like we're all, between Daniel, Sharon, and I, we all travel a lot too, and we're gonna, at least the way my life is going, we're gonna be living in different parts of the world too. But at some point, I want to do at least part of the podcast in person. I love the idea of just, whether it's with one person, two people, moving. I think that makes it more engaging as well. And also the vision that I see on that I want to bring all the leaders in the coaching world on our podcast, influencer and coaching world, people who are involved in online marketing and business, but more importantly, that in the work of coaching, in the craft of coaching as well, those who have built businesses, but also they're actually building the industry as well. And I want them to be on this podcast. And I feel like long term, I would want to have conversations with Brendan Burchard, Ajit Nawalka, with Steve Chandler, with Rich Littman, all these guys who've kind of they're the giants whose shoulders we sat on to build this. In fact, one of the reasons why I got this really long-term perspective on this path, because Brendan was saying this, I think it was one of the he was speaking on stage. He's like, at some point nobody communicates this, but he said that 20 years ago when he jumped on, he might have hurt somebody, or he decided is like, who continues the mantle in a sense. So he's moving on to much bigger things. He's in the coaching world, but he's doing other things as well. And he kind of looked at the camera. He said that, well, you might be the future of this industry. You might be the one who is, we don't communicate this because it's one of those things everybody puts on their hat and just move forward, because it's just like John Gray put on the hat and he became this person who knows about men and women, and he coaches people, trains people. But he literally said, I put on the hat for that. But then the question that Brendan Burchard asked was that, well, who carries on the mantle as people move on to bigger things? Who carries? And I realized that, like, why can't we do it? We've been in this industry for a while. Why can't we contribute more? Why can't we serve in this way more, and also build something that will be fun for us, that will be cool, and we get to be around other coaches. So whenever we go away, we meet each other, we go to conferences together, we usually were in the same Airbnb together. And I think the relationships that it's built, and that's the part that I would never, like, I appreciate probably more than anything else, aside from the business, the money, and everything else that we're getting at, the experience that we've gotten working together as partners, as podcasters, as coaches, collaborating together. I don't think you can get it any other way. Like, it's been invaluable for me. It's helped me grow as a leader, as a coach, as a business owner, as a partner, as a life partner, just watching other people, how they approach it. I didn't have any of these examples. And that's why I'm so driven to, let's keep doing this so I can get around more amazing people and move this forward. So hopefully in a few years, we'll be in our resort, Coaching Mastery Community Resort, and Sharon and I, and maybe Daniel and other guests are sitting together. We're going to be broadcasting this podcast for you. And we're going to be sharing about our journey, and it's full of struggles, but ultimately, is long-term, is it worth it for you? And I think that's what we decided, that this is worth it. And also the process is fun for us. So I think that's makes it sustainable.
Absolutely. I love the idea of being able to really have deep conversations, spontaneous conversations with some of these big guys. So if you're listening to this and you have any connection to any of these people, tag them in this podcast or send them this YouTube video or whatever, and let's start a conversation, because we would love to really have a deep conversation about their impact in the world, their vision, the coaching industry, whatever ends up coming out of it. One of the things that I'm excited for in the podcast is our continued improvement. We have done a little bit of work on ourselves as the hosts. Like, how can we get better? Paying attention to how much we're talking, and how much energy and emotional inflection we have, and all these different things. But there's so much more that we can improve on. So I am excited, as we continue to grow the Coaching Mastery community, that we will have even more funds to reinvest into a podcast coach. That is what I'm so excited about, getting to that point, so that we can really refine the structure and the flow and the intentionality of what we do to make it match as best as we can, kind of the way that people process information and their attention and things like that. So that's part of my vision for the future, is getting to be coached in being a podcaster.
And that's a big part of our culture and Coaching Mastery community too. And part of our program is that you get a coach in our community, our main program, at least our main tier. And the reason for that is that we all have blind spots. Right now, we have a marketing coach. We're going to get a podcast coach. We're going to get a sales coach and a team to help us. We don't pretend to know everything. And I think that's where a lot of times ego comes in and stops us from growing. But and this is for you too. If you're growing a business, you've come to a point. I was actually talking to one of our clients in CMC. He actually signed up his first client, and he had a separate, of course, a business account for that. And he was struggling. He's like, "How am I gonna do this editing and everything? How am I gonna? Where am I gonna put it?" He was struggling. I'm like, "Well, shouldn't you be investing part of that into what you're to build this business out?" And part of that, he needed to get a platform that simplifies all the things that he's doing. He's like, it hit him. He's like, "I didn't even think of that." So yes, you need to be reinvesting in your business, whether you get a coach, you get a community, whether you get a consultant to help you move forward. I think that's worth it. But that requires you to keep creating clients. That requires you, if you don't know how to create clients, you definitely want to join school. If you have created a few clients, you've been successful to some degree, you have, you're either doing this part-time or you've had clients here and there, our community will serve you a lot because you will get feedback from so many coaches, and we're consistently sharing what's working in the marketplace, what's not. So definitely join our school with us. You get the first 30 days for free. We still have that, right?
Yes.
And at least at the time of this recording, April 17th, it's $47 per month after the first 30 days. And then by end of May, we made a recent decision. It's going to go up to $97 per month, and we're adding more value there. We're finding the community, but we're really looking for coaches who are sincere and serious about building their business. Not if you're just thinking about it, you've been in the coaching world for a while and you're still considering it. No, you're ready to move your business forward. If you're ready in 6 months from now on, great. Reach out to us then, but you can still join and be part of it. But we're looking, our ideal clients are those who are ready to build their business forward, which means that they're ready to serve clients and they're ready to actually create movement in this area. And those are the people that we want to work with. And to speak to Sherry's point before, when you join our group, you actually get an intro call, welcome call with us that will support you further. So it's not just like you get a platform and some courses, but you actually get support as you move forward.
Absolutely. All right. So we just bared our podcast soul for everybody that listened. And I trust that hearing our story, our journey, our uncertainties, how we've like shifted a little bit will help you gain confidence that you don't have to know it all. Just jump in, start doing the work. And by doing the work, you will have clarity and create clarity around how to continue to do the work in a way that makes the most sense for you. So we're excited for you to have kind of spent this time and energy with us. We're very grateful for that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you know somebody that could benefit from this podcast, or that is is a prominent person in the coaching world that we could connect with to be able to share their expertise even more with our group and with the world as a whole, that would be amazing as well.
Awesome. And make sure you share this with any coaches that you know, and subscribe to our channel, whether you're listening to this on YouTube or you're however you're listening to podcasts. So we're up every week. We're sending great content on YouTube. We're sending multiple versions of that content every week. I think 4 or 5 videos at this point. And if you join our community, you will get to see us live on the podcast, and you can actually interact with us, and we answer your questions and respond to you after the podcast as well. So we're excited to see you join us. But even if we don't, we're excited to see you at some point in one of our events or one of the events we go to. Until then, hope you have an incredible week. Bye.
Bye.